So first question for Trevor, have you outlined your plan, the amnesty plan, I assume, to Trump?
No, but I have put it out there quite a lot. It's in one of my books over there. I've put it on several shows. I know these things percolate through. You know, I think President Trump, he's already got plans to fire several thousand public servants the minute he gets into office. But I think that's good, but this has got to be targeted. We've got to go after the people in BlackRock. We've got to go after the people in Wall Street. It has to be much more targeted than just firing a whole bunch of bureaucrats. We know there is treason in the country. When President Trump got in, he didn't go after Clinton, he didn't go after Obama. I think that's a mistake. Until we see high-level people in this country in orange jumpsuits, this country is not safe.
There are many military-aged Chinese men who have come across the border. Who are they, and what is their end game?
Yeah, look, I think this is a really serious problem, and just for the record, that's not me saying that I think that every guy who rolls in here from China must be a saboteur or a Chinese intelligence agent, and I don't think anybody is suggesting that. But the short answer to the question directly is nobody knows and nobody's trying to find out. And there are a lot of reasons to be very concerned about this from the standpoint of intelligence and sabotage operations, as crazy as that would have once sounded. People like Michael Yan, who I respect enormously, have said repeatedly that he's been on the border. And Yan is a former Special Forces guy and the most experienced combat correspondent we have. And he said, look, I've watched these guys come across the Darien Gap and show up at the border, and everybody else is half dead and dragging. And now I got 12 guys moving together who seem like that whole jungle crossing didn't faze them. And in fact, he said to me one time, I feel like I'm back in group, by which he means back at Fort Bragg as a Special Forces guy, because everything about this just smells wrong. The cost now, I mean, people are coming in arriving from China and paying $35,000 to $60,000 a head for being brought to the border and then transported across the border. So the image that these are all unemployed, factory workers from Shanghai, desperate and somehow getting here makes no sense. Of course, they're somehow making it out of a totalitarian regime. We could go on for a long time, but when you got thousands and thousands and thousands of these guys in organized fashion showing up and then disappearing into the interior, that's a big problem. The Biden administration's response has been to do everything possible to facilitate the movement of the folks into the United States. First of all, we effectively pay for all the camps in this conveyor belt that moves everybody across Central America to the border because we provide the lion's share of the funding to the UN agencies. But then after that, they distribute them around the country at your expense. And the biggest change they've made to policy recently is they reduced the number of questions they ask people at the border to a standardized 5 questions that everybody and his brother knows. They don't change. And the Border Patrol guys are on record saying, on average, we spend 15 minutes processing these guys. So, back to my original point, despite all the indicators, nobody knows, nobody's trying to find out, and what we're doing is distributing them around the country. So it's as crazy as it would have once sounded, it's a real concern.
Yeah.
Look, when the Nazis took Norway, they had people on the ground in Norway sabotaging. They had politicians who would roll over for them. Same thing happened in France. This is what you do. This is what I would do if I was Xi Jinping.
And let me just add, I believe we were the last country on the planet to require people who were entering legally from Paris, from Berlin, from London, requiring them to provide vaccine passports. We were the last country to require that. We required it up until not that long ago. Meanwhile, the borders are wide open to those seeking overtly to do us ill and being aided and abetted by those who have sworn to protect us. This was surreal to me and continues to be. Let me ask the next question. How can we fortify ourselves against the loss of critical infrastructure, or the impending loss, or the weakening, the vulnerability?
There are a whole variety of things that you can do, because, start with this. Do a thought experiment and imagine that you don't have any power, and you don't have any power for the foreseeable future, and everything else that means. So you don't have access to your bank account. You're not going to pump gas from a gas station. You're not... The supermarket, even if it has food right now, is not going to have food very long. You're going to be on your own, and you're going to be on your own for an extended period of time. So what does that mean? That means water, food, depending on where you're living, addressing heat, air conditioning, or at least being able to live. A lot of houses these days, unfortunately, are built in a way without AC in a hot climate. It's very difficult to survive. Anyway, you can do that. Obviously, after you're all done with that, unless you're a super prepper and you're planning on climbing up on the mountaintop and being able to grow and replenish your food supply and produce water without having to have an electric pump, yada, yada, that's only a stopgap measure. The real answer is we can't afford to ignore this threat. We just can't. I got a brother-in-law in San Francisco. He keeps buying more ammunition. That's his solution. As much as I love him, that's also only a stopgap solution. That that only works so long.
I think we have to realize too that even if we don't get violence through this summer, I think if President Trump is elected, especially in the lame duck period between his election and Biden handing over power, I think we'll see major riots in this country, probably abetted by the people coming in from China. And I don't say this to discourage people from voting, but understand that it's very likely things will get a lot worse before they get better. The road through that, people should be prepared with their medicines, their basic food, generators, all of that kind of thing, and be as rural as you can, at this stage anyway. And as Sam says, that's only a stop. This is only going to go, this could go on for a long time, but we could also have intense short periods of civil disruption as well, especially if the election doesn't go the way of the left. I think they will not be happy.
Well, I just want to say this sounds pretty grim, doesn't it? We have been at the Center for Security Policy warning about this kind of circumstance for a couple of decades now. And it's, infuriating, to say the least, that there's been so little done to address these problems. Not least that in the last year, I think it was, I lost track at the time, but we got $1.2 trillion appropriated for infrastructure, investments. And I'm not sure that a dime has got into actually making the grid resilient, let alone really secure. To the contrary, I think what's been done is, we've made it even more vulnerable, because now we not only are getting rid of the most reliable elements of the grid, the coal and gas-powered plants, we're buying more stuff from China that is going to make it up, apparently. So we're told. So I just wanted to express, in terms of the people that I know who are seriously working on this problem, I would recommend to you one of the partnerships. We're going to talk more about the Sovereignty Coalition that we've all been working on this WHO exercise with when Joe gets up. But I will just tell you that we have an outfit called the Secure the Grid Coalition that has been doing really important work on this. Short-term fixes are few and far between. I think the ones that Sam and Trevor talked about in terms of preparedness are the most obvious. But what we've got to get done is to get everybody who wants your votes this year to address with you the question of what are they going to do to make the grid more resilient. And by the way, it's not just the Chinese Communist Party or the odd jihadi. We just this past weekend had a very significant solar storm. And it's not entirely clear to me what happened, but despite the fact that it was described as being severe, it did not have the kind of catastrophic effect that we thought it might. What is to be determined is, has it degraded the infrastructure that was affected, but hasn't actually caused it to fail catastrophically so far? But it could. But all of this is simply to say, it is the height of irresponsibility that our nation has not made the progress that we've been able to identify, we've been warned about, we've been talking about for decades. And so I just urge you to take this opportunity on this as on everything else we're talking about here, folks, to try to make sure that your voices are being heard with the people that, as I'm fond of saying, at least for the next 6 months, are keenly interested in your views. Not so much after November, but at least for the next 6 months. I mean, all up and down that ballot, as I said. Please make your voice heard on both this Chinese threat as well as the grid vulnerability.
Yeah. This one is for you specifically, Frank. How do we unwind from the WHO directive, assuming it might be implemented? Is there a way to unwind from that?
Yeah, and I don't want to take Joe's thunder here. I was late. I apologize because I'm thrashing on that very topic for the moment. If the directive is, if the treaties are approved by this World Health Assembly, as it's called, that'll be meeting on the 27th through the 1st of next month, the next hopeful step is that there is a alternative administration that withdraws us from not just the agreements, but also from the organization itself. That will take some time. In fact, Donald Trump, before he left office, announced that he was withdrawing from the treaty, and it didn't get done before Joe Biden came in, and Joe Biden, in first day, reversed it. But the larger problem is, even if all that happens, from the end of May until January 20th, you have these guys in a position to do everything they can to institutionalize these arrangements. And by the way, they include, among other things, we didn't talk about this, but a digital ID that everybody's supposed to have, and that everything will then be made contingent upon you using. And if you study this even a little bit, one of the other pieces of what we face with the Chinese Communist Party is this unbelievably comprehensive means of controlling populations. They call it the social credit system. And the piece of the social credit system that is missing at the moment outside of China is the digital ID. You get that ostensibly for being able to monitor health conditions and be able to detect when there's a pandemic emerging and all this stuff. You can bake into it anything you want to put on that digital platform, including your bank account, including, your social media posts, including, where you live, where you work, and all that. And that can, especially if you overlay on top of it the central bank digital currency, it becomes the means of absolute control. So it's another reason why I think the right answer is trying to prevent these things from being approved in the first place But if we do have to extricate ourselves from this, it's going to have to happen fairly aggressively, especially because, as I mentioned, I think in September, the UN is going to try to get the Secretary General of the UN similar kinds of powers. So this global governance thing will be very rapidly upon us, I think.
Sam, how has the CIA's control of the news media evolved since Operation Mockingbird? And related, how has the CCP infiltrated America's news outlets?
Well, so first of all, I would like to make clear I'm not responsible for Operation Mockingbird, so let's just put that on the record. Look, I think the way to look at the U.S. government's involvement with the news media is to look at it as a whole of government thing. That's not my intent to absolve the CIA. It's just to say this is not limited to a CIA thing. This is a whole of government effort, and it clearly is completely antithetical to the First Amendment, right? The founders' principle was we have a marketplace of ideas within extremely broad boundaries. You talk, the best ideas will win out. The American people are not idiots, and they'll figure it out, and that's it. That's what free speech boils down to. These guys have a fundamentally different idea, which is they get to decide what you get to say, what you get to write, and what is permitted. And they'll couch it as Marxists always do. It's always about the verbiage and what taglines, misinformation, disinformation, all of these other labels, but it boils down to censorship and restricting free speech. So those relationships between the entire intelligence community and the law enforcement community are now very widespread. And in fact, the FBI just announced that it was, after all of the controversy about working with Facebook and everybody else to censor things during the pandemic in the last election, they just announced very transparently that they were back in the business of working with social media companies in advance of this election to prevent, you guessed it, disinformation. And in fact, the governor of Pennsylvania, where I live, stood up a whole new outfit, which he calls election integrity, I don't know, Truth, Justice, and the American Way Commission, I'm sure is what it's called. But the point is, they cooperate with the guys in the Homeland Security, what's it called, CISA, the critical infrastructure. There's an entire section within the Homeland Security Department of Homeland Security that's supposed to focus on critical infrastructure. What you don't realize is that they have defined, they now have created a new category called cognitive infrastructure. And so you thought they were supposed to be stopping people from blowing up bridges and dams and things like that. They have now decided it's their job to protect cognitive infrastructure, by which they mean transparently control speech. And so the governor of Pennsylvania just created a new entity to work with them in the state of Pennsylvania, and it's mostly focused on anybody who questions the integrity of elections, integrity in quotes.
But that's another infrastructure piece that gets put into place if you sign on to these World Health Organization treaties, by the way, is a censorship mechanism. Because you see, you can't have people saying things that are contrary to the World Health Organization's directives about public health, about pandemics, about vaccines, about what have you. So it's very much another means by which they can try to lock this stuff in.
The other day I wrote a piece, and it had to do with election integrity, I believe. And I'm active with a lot of political groups in Pennsylvania, patriot groups, if you will. One of the patriot leaders, no, I'm sorry, it was Dee Dee did this, right, on her Facebook page, posted something that I had written, and it was immediately banned by Facebook. They said for lewd adult content. As I recall, I was fully dressed when I wrote it, but they banned it entirely, saying it was lewd. It expressly sexual adult content. And then, of course, there's no effective way to appeal that. You're just banned. They
I
shut
think in
down
her case, it was
account.
permanently.
Yeah, that's right. They put
she's
her
a
in Facebook
non-person.
jail. Yes, she doesn't exist anymore. She was sent to the gulag for
The digital
printing something
gulag.
on politics that I wrote.
And of course, all of this is about, let's not forget, the effort to have misinformation panels and so on, and committees, and shut people down, that they then said, oh, we're not going to do that. But do they ever really stand down permanently? No. They're constantly shape-shifting. They're always focused on the goal, on the mission, which is censorship, silencing, ensuring that there's one true narrative, and even Sam's book, getting people permanently non-personed on social media. And we saw this in spades, if you can still say that, during COVID, right? Anything that related to anything that we knew to be true got us into all kinds of hot water because of misinformation. We knew it was true. And now, at least slowly, things are coming out that, oh yeah, hydroxychloroquine was a good thing. It was people who, right, we've been following this. So does that mean they're going to stand down and say, oh, you know what, you guys are right, we're really sorry? Never, never, never.
Can I just add, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, who was the one who told us all that never listen to the internet when it comes to information about COVID. The government should be your only source of truth, is now at Harvard University working on ways to regulate speech worldwide. So just letting you know.
Yeah. Which leads right into the next question for Trevor, but all of you can answer. And I know we have people speaking in the afternoon to this point too, so I'm going to hang on to this. What is the RNC, particularly Laura Trump's strategy to combat the left's initiatives and corruption, and do we have time to expedite?
I don't know about the RNC strategy. I think Michael Whatley is the new, from North Carolina. I've met the guy, and I talked to him about what the radicals were doing in North Carolina, and there was nothing that ever came out of that. So I do not think the RNC has any idea of the problem or what it's going to do. I think there are certainly people in the around Trump who have some strategies, Stephen Miller and our friend who's Peter Navarro and others. And there are definitely plans to take back the infrastructure, get rid of a lot of people, put a new farm team in. But I don't specifically know if they understand what the real long-term strategy. Look, I believe our role going forward is to complete what Reagan started, to end the evil empire. Because the evil empire, where are they going to end the evil empire, or it's going to end us? And that is now China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, and all of their friends, and their friends in America. So I think we have got to be raising this issue all the time, is how do we not just take our country back, but how do we stop supporting our enemies all over the world? Because as Frank said, we fund China. China is nothing without us. We're funding our own destroyers, and we have got so many traitors in Wall Street and places like that doing this, enabling this, and so many traitors in our government that we have a problem.
Yeah.
Concur.
Anyone else on that? Concur? Yeah. For the panel, given the potential for a cyber attack that was cited by 2027, I think it was bigger than cyber attack, but something catastrophic by 2027. Given the debilitating nature, wouldn't that effectively necessitate a full nuclear response by U.S. strategic forces? And to what extent could that prospect be a deterrent under what we used to think of as MAD, mutually assured destruction?
Well, Peter, we've got to understand, we haven't built a new nuclear weapon since 1992. We don't even know if they still all work. Russia has got way more nukes than us that we know of anyway. China is rapidly expanding its strategy, and would Biden even use them? You know, this is the thing. You know, I do not. Our nuclear capability, our nuclear deterrence is not. I don't think it really scares the bad guys that much. Not like it should. But you guys would know more about that than me, so maybe you can comment.
Yeah, well, that's I used to do this in the Pentagon for Reagan, and about the time I left, we were finishing up the nuclear arsenal that we have today. We've relied on it since then. As Trevor says, we haven't modernized anything. I mean, we've modernized some of the missiles a bit, but mostly just to sort of replace their innards. And the last time we tested a nuclear weapon, realistically underground, was 1992. So this raises questions as to how credible that deterrent is, even if it were not obsolescent. But the fact that it's not appropriate to the kinds of challenges that we're facing at the moment raises another level of issue with deterrence. But I don't know what to tell you other than to say that this is why we wanted to come and talk to you. These are the sorts of issues that the American people are oblivious to, largely. And you may say, well, I'd just as soon be oblivious to all of them, given what a headache this all sounds like. But the truth of the matter is that it's up to us to make the people who represent us do what they're supposed to do. For reasons we've been talking about throughout the program this morning, they're not necessarily going to do it on their own. You'd like to think they would, and some do. Some do. I mean, there are a relative handful that are quite responsible on all of this stuff. But part of what's up here, honestly, is what friends of mine call a 300-front war. There's just too much going on, and you can't possibly be managing all of it. So it's hard to overstate the importance, I think, of people like yourself and people who hopefully you'll be able to help us reach through the video and through, you know, your own interactions. Steve Bannon does a marvelous job, I think, and I'm proud to be on his show from time to time, helping to raise awareness about these sorts of things, helping to connect dots, helping to give people action, right? But it takes all of us doing our part, and not least, as I say, we have a window here during which there are going to be opportunities, I suspect, for each of you. At least if you have any money, they will be looking for you to come and meet with them. And I think to some extent they still do these quaint town hall meetings, though not as much as they used to. But there are chances, there are, you know, opportunities that can be seized to communicate with the people representing you and ensuring that they are paying attention to the sorts of things that you're concerned about. And we hope these things will be among them. And to the extent that there are good ideas, and I'm sure you're going to hear from the team in the afternoon session more on the ideas front. Brian Kennedy in particular is one of our thought leaders on all of these issues. He's been very, very active for, well, a couple of decades now on, for example, missile defense as a way to enhance deterrence. You know, it's one thing to threaten to blow people up. It's another to say, you're not going to be able to attack us effectively, at least through missiles. That's a key piece of a deterrent calculation that we should be farther along on than we are. So I just wanted to say, we're at a moment where there's lots of things to be worried about. And we want to help you think through how you prioritize the things that you personally are worried about and are going to be telling your elected representatives they need to be attending to as a result.
And I'm hearing something that's drawing out an echo in my mind. The Committee on the Present Danger China that Brian Kennedy chairs and Frank is a co-chair, and I believe all our speakers are part of that committee. was formed as to replicate the original Committee on the Present Danger, which was done under Ronald Reagan against the Soviet Union. So there are people, great people, brilliant people, experienced, knowledgeable people, experts right here on exactly this. And lots of it is how not to get nuclear, but how to present an adequate deterrent, if that's a fair thing to say. Mm-hmm. And that was exactly the impetus for forming that Committee on the Present Danger. China.
Well, could I just add to that?
Yeah.
I mean, again, there are other ways to work this problem, and I had promised that I was going to come back to the Committee on the Present Danger point. What they did in the run-up to the 1980 election was they gave Reagan a strategy for how to take down the Soviet Union. And he took that to the American people and sought a mandate to do that. And I had a small hand after the election in executing that strategy, but it was, other than military, I mean, he had peace through strength, there was deterrence, but it was doing things like cutting off the cash flow. This is why we come back to this in the context of the Committee on the Present Danger. China is, that is an obvious step to start changing the Chinese calculations. Another that I'm very keen on myself is working with the Chinese people who have even more reason than we do to hate these people. They've killed, by some estimates, 100 million of them.
Can I just...
And that doesn't count the ones that they've killed in the womb, by the way, which is another 400 million or so.
When the people in Iran rose up recently and almost overthrew the mullahs, had America stood with them, the mullahs would be gone now. Where the people of China stood up against the CCP a couple of years ago, had America stood up, that would be over. If the people of Cuba, when they rose up not long ago, had the American government got behind them, the Cuba would be history. The Communist Party of Cuba would be history now. These have all happened when they weren't getting help. Reagan was very, very active in helping the people of Eastern Europe and helping the people of the captive nations. And they will do the work themselves if we give them the moral support. You know, it doesn't even mean American boots on the ground. It just means the moral support and stopping funding their oppressors.
Yes.
I want to throw in just one comment very quickly here. You can talk about nuclear missiles capability, whether we modernize, we haven't modernized, carrier battle groups, all of that's important. It doesn't really make any difference if nobody's going to use any of those capabilities. And I think even as opposed as I presume everybody in this room is to Joe Biden and his administration, we still have a really hard time wrapping our heads around the enormity of where we are. Right? Iran just staged a massive missile attack on Israel from its territory, violating and breaking every norm, rule, all the things we said they would never do. In the day after that, the President of the United States said we would not assist in an attack on Iran and asked the Israelis not to respond. In the midst of their response to this abomination of an attack that I won't go into the details of, that the Hamas staged on Israel last fall, and the Israelis are now in Gaza, and we're withholding weapons, and we just tried, under the guise of calling it a ceasefire, to run by the Israelis, get them to sign on to a deal we brokered without their involvement. That wasn't a ceasefire. It was a permanent peace that allowed Hamas to remain in power. That we got everybody else on board, kept the Israelis out of the mix, had Hamas announce that they had signed to try to back the Israelis into a corner. They wisely refused to sign on to it, but that's what we did. We negotiated in bad faith, supposed to be our closest allies in the Middle East, to get them to sign on to something calling it a ceasefire that was a permanent peace with Hamas that left them in power. I cite those things just, I mean, we could go on for the rest of the day on this. This is not any U.S. administration that you have seen in your lifetime. Jimmy Carter was not this as bad as he was. So when the Chinese impose a blockade on Taiwan, as I say all the time, and you're waiting for the part where Joe Biden's going to send the 7th Fleet to break the blockade, I don't think that's happening. I'm not taking that bet, right? He's going to say it's up to the UN, right? That's unfortunately where we are. So as Trevor was just saying when we came up here, I mean, that's the reality of where you are. So all your calculus about what they will do and when they will do it has to take that into account, in my opinion. Your boy is sitting in the Oval Office, and his whole administration is basically, as Frank and I call it, Xi Jinping's dream team, right? They're all compromised by the Chinese. So time to run the table.
Well, thank you very much, Sam, Trevor, Frank. Really, this has been unbelievably informative. I know it feels deeply depressing, right? You're feeling pretty depressed?
I'm depressed now.
The vulnerabilities are nearly infinite, 300 front. As I say, wherever you turn, there's people attacking us. But the upside of that is, wherever you aim, you're going to hit something.
We've got them just where we want them, surrounded.
Everywhere. Right. They're everywhere. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Yeah. But for now, thank you all. Really.
Yeah. And we always got to remember, know the truth, and the truth shall set ye free.
Truly.
Truth is the only way out of this.
It is. And we know that everyone in positions of power and influence is lying, which means the job does fall to you to be that voice. We have, for AFA, it's the torch, the truth, the light. It's up to you.